Anyone But You became one of 2023's surprise hits as it thrived at the box office and cemented Glen Powell as a major draw, but the Hollywood star has finally found a true follow-up to the popular rom-com 2 years later. Although he started acting in the early 2000s, it wasn't until a few decades later that Powell's career really took off. Following his roles in Top Gun, Maverick and Hitman, he co-starred alongside Sydney Sweeney in Anyone But You, which legitimized him as a top name in the industry. As a result, Glen Powell led some nostalgic movie revivals such as Twisters, but he has also taken his talents to TV, with his new show, Chad Powers, making headlines. Not only is Chad Powers the perfect Ted Lasso replacement in the sports comedy genre, but it also feels like a true successor to his 2023 rom-com as the two share similar tones, alongside one major plot detail that gives them an obvious connection. Chad Powers and Anyone But You both have Glen Powell putting on an elaborate ruse. Glen Powell as Chad looking confused with a goofy look in Chad Powers. Despite being completely different projects, both Chad Powers and Anyone But You center around a complicated ruse that continues to spiral. Chad Powers focuses on a disgraced footballer named Russ Holiday trying to return to the sport under a new alias. Using prosthetics and fake ID, Russ transforms into Chad Powers, and while his ploy has started successfully in the first few episodes, it seems obvious that keeping up his facade will become extremely difficult and serve numerous ultimatums as the series progresses. Anyone But You follows a similar concept, although the complex scheme involved a pretend romance between BEA and Ben. After their short-term relationship goes south, the two agree that pretending to be together would be mutually beneficial as they attend a wedding, leaving their loved ones fooled about their true feelings towards one another. Although they eventually fall in love, the entire story revolves around one big lie, just like Powell's new project. The football ruse in Chad Powers and romantic deception in Anyone But You may feel widely different on paper, but the fact that they both take place around Powell's characters lying for personal gain proves the new Apple TV Plus comedy is the ideal follow-up to his 2023 hit that we've all been waiting for. Anyone But You and Chad Powers both feel like 00's era projects. Glen Powell as Ben and Sydney Sweeney as BEA walking together in Anyone But You. Television and movies have changed a lot since the 2000s, but while many projects try to be overly innovative, both Chad Powers and Anyone But You seem to embrace a more nostalgic feel. They each have a relatively simplistic concept that becomes the predominant focus, resulting in a fun, light-hearted story that is easy to follow. Rather than leaning into obscure pop culture references or meta-humor to create their laughs, the two Glen Powell outings instead opt for a more silly and often cheesy approach. While some viewers may find this cringy, it certainly helped Powell's Anyone But You succeed based on its impressive $220.3 million box office haul. The rom-com felt like a true 2000s throwback, and Chad Powers' ludicrous plan would also feel right at home a few decades prior, as the raunchy sports comedy has the kind of atmosphere and vibrant personality that would make it a noughties classic. Chad Powers and Anyone But You are Glen Powell's most critically divisive roles this decade so far. Glen Powell as Russ Holiday during his Oregon game in Chad Powers. Unfortunately, while the charming, laid-back style of Chad Powers and Anyone But You works for some, not everyone is a fan. Anyone But You certainly made a lot of money, but the reception was pretty mixed across the board, as evidenced by its 53% Rotten Tomatoes score and its 6.1 IMDb rating. The Guardian described it as slick yet soulless, making it one of Powell's most divisive projects. Now, Chad Powers is following a similar trajectory, as it seems to be slightly more favored by general audiences, yet critics are torn about the new show. The Hollywood Reporter cited it as disappointingly conventional, while admitting it still has potential.